Hey everyone, and welcome back. My name is Mackenzie, aka Astromac, and I'm a professional astrologer, and I'm here to talk all things astrology with you. Today, I want to talk about something that we all go through in our lives, and something that we'll probably have to go through multiple times in our lives, and that is dealing with difficult transits. We all go through difficult times in our lives, and usually those difficult times are somehow correlated to difficult transits that we're going through. And when I say difficult, it's not like difficult in a way like where you go to the grocery store and like your favorite pasta sauce is sold out. Although that does suck sometimes. But what I'm talking about is like those truly difficult times that manifest as like really intense internal feelings, or they could even be external situations or circumstances, or they manifest in relationships or whatever it might be. And these things that just like really push us in a way that can feel really uncomfortable. So let's dive in. So this is kind of a big topic. So let's start off with like, what even are transits? So when we are born with a birth chart, and that birth chart stays the same throughout our entire life. It's kind of like it's written in stone, and it's a static chart that is unchanging. Although there are such things as like secondary progressions, but even with that, you look at that in relation to your birth chart. But when you're born, it's not like the planets stop moving. Time keeps moving on, and so the planets also keep moving on. And so transits are the transiting planets, aka the moving planets. So, like, for example, if you were to get like a transit reading, that is when an astrologer looks at, your birth chart and then also the transiting planets on the outside, and where those transiting planets are moving in your own chart and what kind of aspects they're making to your birth chart, basically. And so because everybody has such a unique birth chart that is, unique to themselves, then these transits, as you can assume, affect everyone very uniquely and very differently. And because it is so unique, that might be like why you read those horoscopes online or whatever, why when you read it, it might be like, oh, this doesn't really resonate. And that's just because it's written for like a very broad audience. And if you want something more tailored to you and your chart and way more specific, that's why you go to a trusted astrologer who has good morals and has good ethics and is well studied, and somebody that you feel connected to on a personal as well as like emotional level. Using this time to plug myself a little bit, I do offer transit readings, and I do love looking at timing and trying to understand like what lessons we're meant to be learning during these transit readings. So you can book with me down at the link below. But also, like, you don't have to get a reading with me if you don't, feel aligned with me or whatever. There's plenty of other astrologers out there, and so just make sure it's an astrologer that you trust and feel aligned with, because that's going to be really important in helping to get the reading that you deserve. But yeah, essentially that's what transits are. It's kind of tracking the movement of the planets and how they interact with you and your own chart and how that is reflected in your life. And if you're wanting to learn more about transits, then I recommend tracking the moon in your transit chart and just seeing, journaling each day and seeing what the day brings. And it's because the moon moves through our chart the fastest, like it makes a full circle in our chart in a month. And then the sun, it makes a full rotation in a year, and some of the other planets, they're on their own time. Some of those more difficult transits that I'll be talking about today are transits that involve the outer planets, being Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and even Saturn. Those are kind of like, they move so slowly that they kind of define certain eras of our life. And so, like, for example, when any of these outer planets transit like a sensitive part of our chart, or they transit an inner planet of our own, like Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, we're really going to be feeling that. And of course, just depending on which of those outer planets is transiting and what house it's transiting, and what kind of contact it's making with what of your personal planets, it's going to manifest very differently and very uniquely to each person, really. But like, that feeling where it's just kind of like, it feels like all of a sudden you just get hit with this like wave of anxiety, or it might even feel like you're just like going through hell, and it's like there's no specific reason why, but it's just like this persistent like undercurrent feeling that you're feeling, and it's going on inside of you, and there's just like this heaviness, and you don't even know how to explain what's going on. And it's like when people try to be like helpful or supportive and, offer support, it's kind of like you don't even know what kind of support to ask for because you don't even know what's really like going on inside of you. All you know is that you're feeling a lot. And sometimes it might feel like no matter what you do, you can't push past it. Or maybe like you just suddenly start acting out of character and like doing things that you normally wouldn't. And like maybe you start to feel like super chaotic and just kind of like off and like you're just not quite yourself. Or it could even be like times where we just feel like super, super hypersensitive. Like everything just feels like it's too much and we just get like really overwhelmed really easily. Or it might be a phase where it feels like, everything that you've built in your life suddenly comes crumbling down and it feels like you've lost almost a sense of control in your life. If you understand any of those feelings or any of those resonated, then you yourself have probably gone through and survived a difficult transit of these outer planets. So if any of that makes sense and you yourself have survived a difficult transit, give yourself a pat on the back because that shit is hard. And if you're going through one of those phases right now, I'm right there with you. And guess what? These transits pass and we will get through it. Now, there's many ways of looking at these difficult transits, and everybody has their own right to decide how they feel or how they perceive different situations. So I'm just going to give my 2 cents on the matter. The first way that you can think about these difficult transits is like you could sit and wallow and be like, well, Pluto's conjunct my Mercury, so I'm not going to speak up or use my voice. Or like, Saturn is opposing my sun right now, so no matter what I do, it's never going to be enough. And sitting there and being like, oh, woe is me, like, feel bad for me. I'm going through the worst possible transits imaginable. And everybody's entitled to a little bit of a pity party every once in a while. And if that's a way to help you kind of move through the emotions, then that's fine. But when you're sitting in the space of like using astrology as a tool to hold yourself back, and like when you're using it as an excuse as to why you can't do something right now, and that's a way of using it to hold yourself back and keep yourself small. Or you could use it as a tool in a way where like it's going to probably be a difficult time, but it's also going to be a huge time of growth and transformation. And when you can use it in a way to help empower yourself and learn the lessons that you're meant to be learning during this time, that's when it can be a real tool to help you level up and continue growing and evolving as a human. Like for me, I'm going through multiple difficult transits right now, and I'm not gonna lie, I had myself like a little pity party over the weekend, and it's not like I was just sitting in this like victim mentality though, but it's like I was really just feeling like all these raw emotions, and I was really just feeling everything and grieving and moving through the emotions and not stuffing them down, and I was journaling my way through it and pretty much just purging all this old shit that got triggered by a situation. And it wasn't even like the situation itself, it was what the situation brought up from within me and what it reflected to me about myself and how I truly feel about myself. And so I wasn't resisting what these transits are trying to bring up within me, but I was leaning even deeper into them, and I was trying to listen to what the lessons are trying to teach me right now. And so if you were one of the few people who got to witness me this weekend, I apologize. But I was really just trying to lean into it and, learn those lessons as they were coming up in real time for me. And so, I could have used like what I'm going through right now as an excuse as to why I like couldn't make a YouTube video this week, or I could use it as an excuse as to why like this is why I never put myself out there anymore, and this is like why no matter what I do I always end up getting hurt, and like using it as a way to hold myself back from living my life, or I could use it as proof that I'm living. And I could use it as a tool of like inspiration and creation, and use it as a way to alchemize what I'm going through, and make a video about what I'm going through right now, because I know I'm not alone in being the only person going through difficult transits. We're all kind of collectively going through difficult transits right now. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm still kind of going through it right now, and it might not appear externally, but I'm definitely feeling it inside, and I'm feeling a lot right now. And I don't know what's going to come of these transits over the next couple of years, and I'm not really sure on the lessons I'm meant to be learning. But because I understand astrology, I know that when Neptune's involved, I'm meant to be releasing control and, embracing the unknown and surrendering and, keep moving forward even when things feel unclear. Or I'm meant to be learning lessons in like boundaries or deepening my sense of spirituality. And then I know like when Saturn's involved, I'm meant to be learning lessons in responsibility and taking accountability and just kind of recognize that those things that I'm putting effort into right now, they're going to require some patience, and so I'll be learning lessons in patience. So like when I notice, for example, that I'm starting to like act irresponsibly and slack off or whatever, that's when I'm kind of shying away from the lessons that I'm meant to be learning with a Saturn transit. Or like when I know Pluto is involved, I know it's going to be a time of very, very deep transformation. And, transformation is not a painless process. And again, with Pluto, like I know that Pluto tends to bring endings of things, but it also brings these new beginnings. And it's usually in a way that serves your own growth and evolution as a human. And another thing Pluto likes to do is it likes to bring those hidden things up from the surface, like from those deep parts of our psyche. Then just having to deal with some of those truths that Pluto brings up to the surface and confronting some of those things that, you'd rather keep hidden. And lucky for me, I'm going through all of these at the same time. So if I start acting a little bit different or weird in the upcoming years, it's just because I'm going through a time of a lot of personal change. And I'm nervous, but I'm also pretty excited because, these changes are probably something that are very much needed. And so if you're in this grouping of like where you know enough astrology to be able to like spot a difficult transit when you see it, but then you find yourself kind of like catastrophizing and thinking of like the worst case scenario. And, this is no judgment because I was like this for years. And even still, I'll look at a transit and I'm like, oh, fuck, what's going to happen, It's just the nature of our minds to seek out the potential threats or dangers, that we make up in our own minds, truthfully. And so if you are in that boat where you are like catastrophizing potential future transits, it might be healthy to take a step away from checking your transits so religiously and instead just kind of go out and live your life. And realize that the transits are happening and transits are simply reflective and they just reflect what's going on in our life. It's not like the planets cause anything to happen. And so those transits, they're reflecting what's going on in our lives, whether we're consciously like paying attention to the transits or not. Also take some time to realize that if you're watching this right now, then you yourself have probably survived every difficult transit you've ever been through. And so just remember that. And if you are still looking up like, oh, what does this transit mean in some of like those older astrology books, because yes, that is one way to try and like predict what may or may not happen or what you may or may not experience. But take everything that's written in those older astrology books with a grain of salt because the world is a very different place than it was when those books were written. And so if you do still feel the need to check like what your transits might mean on like an app or wherever, that's okay. Just kind of if you are imagining worst case scenario, then I challenge you to also reflect on like the best case scenario and kind of recognize that it'll probably fall somewhere in the middle or it might like be totally different, something that you could never have even predicted, especially if it's Uranus. And if you are still checking your transits and like you see one in the upcoming future that you're like scared about for whatever reason, that would be one of those instances where I would recommend getting an astrology reading with an astrologer who has ethics and that you feel a connection to. Because, as an astrologer, we'll try and help you, see the different kind of pathways that could come from a transit like this. Something that I really, really, really want to stress here as well, though, is please do not stop living your life for fear of an upcoming, potentially difficult transit. That just like completely takes the whole point of life out of it. And so, we're meant to have a wide range of experiences and learn through these experiences and gain wisdom. That's how we learn about ourselves and how we learn about the world. And we can't exactly, learn from experiences if we're just sitting in our homes and working ourselves up about what may or may not happen in a particular transit. And I mean, I guess you could do that. Like, hey, I'm not you. I'm not here to make a decision or a choice for you and tell you how to live your life. And I guess that is one way to experience a transit. But I really encourage you to like go out and live your life. And it's funny because the day that I had this idea for this YouTube video, Robert Hand, who actually he wrote a lot of these books up here, and he's a very well-known astrologer and author. And I think this was actually a quote in one of his more well-known books called Planets in Transit. But on that day that I had this idea, he shared on his Instagram story a quote from that book that said, "You don't run from your transit, you run into them." So basically, full send into your transits. And the thing about these difficult transits is they're not here to punish us, and they're not here to make us feel like we're constantly being tested, and if we fail the test, then like our life is gonna end up like shit and we fail at life or whatever. But they are here to kind of push us to learn about ourselves and grow as human beings. You know, these are the moments that really shape like who we are and how we act and think and just how we are in the world, really. Like, think about clay being molded. You know, it might feel uncomfortable as we're being shaped into this new version of ourselves, but we're becoming who we're meant to become, really. So just full send, run into your transits. Obviously, keep your wits about you and like use your intuition and your common sense and be aware of your surroundings and don't ignore red flags and people because, you know, people can show up as transits for us. But just go out and live your life. You know, you're not dead yet, so go out and live simply because you deserve to. Use these transits as a time to reflect. And, you know, life is messy and it's hard and it's beautiful and it's full of so much joy and happiness, but also so much pain and sadness and everything in between. And the beautiful part is we get to experience all of it. So if you're going through a difficult time or a difficult transit, just know that more than likely you will make it through. And actually, like, that's the thing about transits is they start and then they last for a certain amount of time, and it's not like every single moment of that time is going to be hard and painful and difficult. But then transits also come to an end. And we see the light at the end of the tunnel and we get out of that tunnel and it's like we take in this giant breath of fresh air, and then a lot of times the planet moves retrograde and we move back into that tunnel. But then it really does come to an end, and you know, we move on with our lives, and then we go through, you know, some of these great transits, or then we move into another difficult transit, you know, such is life. And sometimes we experience difficult transits with great transits happening at the same time. Like, that is just the nature of life, and that's the nature of transits, and they reflect each other in that way. And keep in mind that planets don't cause anything to happen in your life, and they don't cause you to feel any certain way, but they do reflect how you may be feeling, and they do reflect certain situations and events and people that come up in your life. Like, my favorite analogy for astrology is that clock analogy where, you know, the clock doesn't choose what time it is, but it does reflect what time it is. And that's the same thing with astrology. So rather than like thinking of the planets as these like bad guys in the sky who want to wreak havoc in our lives and make us sad and depressed and, you know, not know who the fuck we are anymore and, you know, who bring destruction, think of them more as like allies, who are these allies in the sky who are just simply reflecting where we are in life and reflecting our own level of growth. And also just try to trust that everything is happening exactly as it's meant to. And really just try to think of these difficult transits as like they just kind of reflect that we're entering a new era or a new phase of life. And in this new phase of life, some of those old things get left behind, like old identities that don't serve us anymore, or people or situations or places, and they kind of get shed away. And that can be painful because, you know, we as humans do this thing where we like to attach meaning to things, or we really attach onto things, and we have attachment issues, speaking to myself. And so again, these difficult transits just simply reflect what we're going through, and they reflect that it's going to be a time of growth. And so if you're going through a difficult transit right now, just know that you're going through a growth phase and it will be okay, and try not to resist the growth. That was a really long rant, so hopefully you've stuck with me through this, and I guess I just had a lot to say about these difficult transits. But now let's go over how some of these difficult transits may feel or manifest in your life. But also keep in mind that everybody experiences transits very differently depending on your own chart and your own lens through how you view the world and your own relationship with these planets. So this will be very, very general and just from, my own experience and my own experience in working with clients and how they feel through these transits. So just keep that in mind. So starting off, you can experience a difficult Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus transit, but these transits tend to pass so quickly that they don't tend to define particularly difficult eras in our life. Whereas, with these outer planets, they do tend to reflect those more slower and more dramatic times in our life. So, for the sake of this video, I'll be focusing on those. So, starting off with Mars, and Mars is not always a difficult transit, and in fact, it tends to bring a boost in energy or a boost in motivation, but sometimes it can make us feel irritable or agitated, or sometimes even more aggressive, or sometimes we just kind of feel quick to anger and quick to react, depending on what sign it's transiting and what planet it's transiting in your own birth chart. And so depending on, what planet Mars is coming into contact with, you might just feel more snappy or feel like yelling more, or just feeling super frustrated. And so what I usually recommend is trying to find some kind of physical outlet to get out some of that pent up energy or aggression. So that could be physical exercise, or dancing around your house, or could be screaming into a pillow, or even just shaking, shaking your body and getting that extra energy out. But then, on the flip side of that, if you don't have a healthy way to express your anger, then that anger can sometimes get turned inward and it can turn into times of depression. And luckily, these Mars transits, they don't tend to last super long. So it's not going to be a prolonged time of feeling lower. That's going to be more one of these outer planets that I'll talk about later. But during a Mars transit, you're going to be really wanting to learn lessons in how to express your anger in a healthy way, because anger is not a bad emotion. It's just one of the many human emotions. And so finding a healthy way to get that out and express that and even channel it creatively or physically again. I'm skipping over Jupiter in this video just for the sake of time, because I've already talked a lot, and Jupiter transits, they tend to be just times of more is more is more. And so if you're going through a particularly difficult time, then it might feel even more difficult. But generally, they do tend to be more positive and abundant transits. Now moving on to Saturn, and Saturn transits, they're always super, super fun. That was a joke. There's always just this serious tone that takes over when we're going through a Saturn transit. And if you haven't watched my Saturn return video yet, I do go into depth about Saturn as a planet and what it represents. But when Saturn is transiting a personal planet or a sensitive part of our chart, it's just a time where we feel the weight of the world a little bit heavier. And I think of Saturn and how it rules over lead, and lead is very heavy and dense, and that's kind of how a Saturn transit feels. And we're really having to learn these lessons in responsibility and accountability and patience and discipline. So if you're going through a Saturn transit, this is not the time to slack off or overindulge or be an asshole. Because Saturn is that planet of consequences, and you reap what you sow, and it's that planet of cause and effect. So you want to be more responsible under these Saturn transits. And that doesn't mean all work and no play, because rest and play are also very productive, and they're very much a part of being responsible for yourself. And they're very much a part of being a human being, and so it's just about finding that right balance. So Saturn transits can just kind of feel heavy and somber, and I don't want to say depressing, but it does just take on this more serious tone. It can feel kind of melancholy, and it's just kind of well, time to grow up. And like I said in my Saturn return videos, Saturn is that planet of reality checks, and Saturn loves to bring us back down to reality. And reality can be kind of harsh, depending on how delulu you've let yourself get. Now, Uranus in transit. So Uranus transits, or Uranus, however you want to say the word, it's funny either way. But with these Uranus transits, these are the ones where like you might just start acting weird, or you might just start like, being different and doing things differently than you have in the past. And you might even start like doing things that you normally wouldn't. And you might even just be like more impulsive and, appear impulsive, at least from the outside. And it's kind of like this energy of like you're just like itching to break free and, be free basically, and liberate yourself and be authentic. And so these Uranus transits, they just typically reflect a time of change in our lives. And whether that change is reflected internally or externally really depends on what house it's transiting and what planet it's transiting. But change is always associated with Uranus. And, sometimes it can be unexpected changes. And I really associate Uranus with the Tower card in tarot, and it can really feel like that sometimes, where it's like everything that we've built up until that moment just comes crumbling down. But I try to trust in Uranus, and I try to trust that the changes that Uranus brings are changes that need to happen, basically, that are needed to kind of liberate my authentic self. Uranus transits can also feel like electrifying, where it's like our mind is going like a million miles a minute, and we might have like more anxiety at the time, but I really associate it with like that feeling of just like being really ungrounded and like pew 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 pew. It's like we're having all these like inspirational downloads and inspirational thoughts and like these breakthrough thoughts and these breakthrough moments. And actually Uranus can bring some of those like powerful breakthroughs. And so yeah, it can kind of feel chaotic, but it's also like a very inspired time. So this is the kind of transit where you really want to be working on getting a good grounding technique into your rituals. Otherwise, you're gonna kind of like fry or burn yourself out a little bit, or you might end up getting like electrocuted. And actually, this is one of those transits where you should, watch out for messing with electricity. And next, we have Neptune, that planet of dreams and illusions and delusions and imagination and intuition. And it does tend to bring these qualities depending on which house it's transiting and which planet it's making contact with. But Neptune transits are really characterized by this feeling of just like fogginess, and it's not always confusion, but it definitely can be. But like with my own personal experience, these Neptune transits, they just kind of feel like raw, they just make you feel super, super sensitive. Again, depending on what planet it's transiting. Like in my readings, I really describe Neptune as this planet that's it's like a slow erosion process. And those things that are like falling away or being eroded, they're those things that don't serve you moving forward. And I recently described it as it's kind of like, when you pull a crystal out of the ground, it's like that raw, like, you see the dirt and everything, but it's kind of like this process of becoming like this polished sphere or looking more polished like those back there. With that slow erosion, it's kind of like softening us, and it's kind of like we just feel so sensitive under a Neptune transit. And like we're just feeling everything so deeply. And over the last few years, I was dealing with Neptune squaring my moon, and our moon is like our deepest emotional space, really. And so I was going through this process of like just feeling everything so deeply. And oh my God, I was so sensitive under that transit, almost like too sensitive, to the point where like I was making things up and hurting my own feelings. And now I'm dealing with Neptune opposing my sun, and it's just like a totally different kind of like raw feeling. It's kind of like I feel like my heart is just like outside of my chest almost. Also keep in mind that like sensitivity is not a bad thing. It's actually a very beautiful thing. And so really allow yourself to feel, but also recognize that Neptune can sometimes bring these delusions or illusions and make things appear differently than what they actually are. And so try not to like jump to conclusions about things or use your imagination as a way to harm yourself or keep yourself back. And as we are being sensitized under a Neptune transit, it is making us more sensitive, but it's also heightening our intuition with that. And like I said earlier, like under these Neptune transits, sometimes it can kind of feel like we're in this like dense fog, and it's kind of like so foggy that we can't even like see our own feet on the ground, and we can't see any paths in front of us. And so it can feel like we don't really know what direction we're supposed to go in, but that's when it's kind of like we're really being pushed to kind of like go within and really utilize and hone in on our own inner compass and use that as a way to guide ourselves forward and really lean into that intuition. And so you really get to know yourself on a pretty deep level with these Neptune transits, depending on what planet it's aspecting and what house, of course. But this is another one that can sometimes heighten our anxiety a little bit or make us more prone to depression. And so I always recommend like try to steer clear of, any hallucinogens or other kind of substances like that during a Neptune transit, just because we are feeling more like sensitive to substances. And our psyche is just a little bit more susceptible under Neptune transits. And now finally, moving on to Pluto. And me and Pluto are good friends at this point, maybe. Now, Pluto brings these deep, deep, deep transformations. And when you're transforming at such a like cellular level, it's not going to be a painless, easy process. With Pluto transits, depending on what house and what planet it's transiting, it can literally feel like a part of us is dying. And this is one of those transits where it's going to be hard to explain like what you're feeling and what you're going through. Kind of like you're just out there living your life, but there's just like this undercurrent of intensity and like this inner shifting feeling. And, life might just feel a little bit darker under a Pluto transit. And Pluto is that planet of death and rebirth. And so under a Pluto transit, there are things that are dying away and falling away. And no matter how difficult or painful it might be during the time, we're meant to release as these things are trying to fall away. And we're not meant to like really latch on and like dig our nails in. We're meant to release and let go, because Pluto is that planet of like, let go or be dragged. So the more that you hold on to those things that are wanting to die away, it'll just make that process more difficult and more painful. And so we're really meant to release with grace and just trust that, whatever is meant to be in your life, it will come back around in another way, shape, or form. And so I really associate Pluto transits with like those dark night of the souls, where it's just kind of like we're brought down to our knees, and it can almost bring us down to some of our rock bottom moments. But Pluto is also that planet of alchemy, and so it knows that once you've reached some of like your lowest of lows, the only way else to go is up. And so it's kind of like you can use those low moments as fuel, as a way to catalyze your own growth and healing. Pluto is like taking that hard shit you've gone through and turning it into gold. So it's kind of like turn your mess into your message and turn your pain into your purpose type of energy. And with these Pluto transits, it's kind of like once you've done the work and you've released what no longer serves you and you've released those attachments, it's a time of powering the fuck up. And a lot of times, like during a Pluto transit, it's a time where you step into your power and you own your power, or you realize your power in some way. So at its core, Pluto really wants to bring transformation, and it wants to help make us stronger and more resilient, but in order to do that, it might kind of feel like we're moving through hell for a little bit. And so the thing about these like life-challenging lessons and difficult transits that we go through is they really help us to build, and they give us like the tools and the grit and the resilience and confidence and strength that we need to move through life and deal with all these different kinds of life experiences. I think that, this isn't applied to everyone, but I think that some people feel like they're owed an easy life. And in reality, not everybody will have an easy life, and most people won't. And the reality is that we need some kind of contrast in our lives, because we can't have this sense of like ease and flow and happiness and joy without going through these moments of, sadness and pain and depression. And it's always about helping us to come back into alignment with what's authentic and true to ourselves and our own experience, really. And reflecting on my own personal life experiences it has been those true, utter tragedies in my life that have taught me so much about myself and about life in general. They were not easy times, and they truly broke me down. They led me down a path of wanting to understand why did I have to go through this, or learning about myself, and eventually that led me to astrology. And here I am years and years later, and I truly don't think that I would have become an astrologer had I not gone through all these super difficult things that I've gone through. And I'm not saying that an astrologer has to go through all these hard things, but I do think that I've had a wide range of experiences, and so I'm able to empathize with a wide group of people, and it definitely makes me a better astrologer, I think. So try to think of these difficult times and these difficult transits as almost like an initiation of sort, and it's kind of preparing us for what's to come later in life. So I know I said this earlier, but turn your pain into your purpose, or your mess into your message. And especially if you're going through a Pluto transit, really alchemize that shit that you're going through and turn it into gold. And then also keep in mind that once you do make it through that difficult time, that it's a constant journey and it's a constant spiral. And the transits, they don't ever stop. The transits, they keep coming. And the transits will continue to initiate and kind of reflect that it's a next phase of life. So if you take anything from this video, let it be to embrace these difficult transits and think of them as being character building times, because really that's what they are. And don't give up, because more than likely you will make it through, and once you make it through, you'll be a lot wiser and probably a lot cooler. So now let's very quickly go through how to work with these transits, because I've already rambled on and on and on. So first and foremost, be sure to check which house an outer planet is transiting, because that's going to be the major theme for that transit. And then you can look at what planets it's aspecting and what houses those planets rule, because those are connected in some way. And focus on those things that you can control. You're in control of your thoughts and your emotions and your beliefs and how you react to certain things and situations and people. It can be really easy to focus on those things that feel like they're out of our control. So when you can shift your focus back to those things that you can control, that puts the power back in your hands. The next thing is, don't internalize the struggle that you're going through. If you're going through a difficult transit, that doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It just means that you're being invited to grow and evolve and let go of something and release something and leave something in the past. So let yourself rest, or grieve if you need to, and don't shame yourself for feeling what you're feeling. And the next thing is to really lean into those tools that help support you. And everyone's toolbox is a little bit different in what helps them, what might work for me might not work for you. And actually during these difficult transits, I always think of it as we're filling up our toolbox in what helps support us in a way. For me, I journal a lot, and I go to therapy, and I have a support system of friends and family that I can turn to, and I also have a Reiki practitioner that I see. Also meditation and getting outside and grounding myself and just being in nature, that really helps. And these are just things off the top of my head, so I might be able to add to this later down below. Even just simply being present and feeling into your body and being fully embodied, that can be a huge thing. And if all else fails, just remember that, one of the most comforting things about difficult transits is they will come to an end. And you can track how long these transits last using all of those different astrology softwares Time Passages or AstroGold, or even just astro.com. There's a bunch of different sites that you can use. But then you can look up those exact dates that the transits are exact, and that can kind of help you prepare and plan accordingly, or help mentally prepare yourself. And just keep in mind that, a difficult transit is not the end of the world, even though it might feel like it in the moment, but it is an opportunity for growth and healing. And it's an invitation into your next phase of life and your next upgraded version of you. And so, again, we're not promised an easy life. It's a continual process of coming back into alignment with ourselves. And sometimes when we're coming back into alignment, it takes pressure and guidance and learning lessons and pruning and, letting that shit go. And, more often than not, those insights that we gain during these difficult transits, they tend to shape who we are on a very deep level. So if you're going through like the thick of like a really difficult transit, try to breathe and ground yourself and just realize that, this is just a part of your journey and you're not defined by what happens during this transit. It's just a part of what you're meant to experience in this life. And also remember that you're not alone. And again, I do offer one-on-one transit readings where we go into depth about what you may be experiencing on a very personal level, and so check the link down below. If this video helped you at all, be sure to like and subscribe and share it with people who might need a little more astrology clarity. And that's all for now, so love you, bye!